All right, welcome to the second of these mini videos on reading and learning strategies. This one is about focusing on your reading, and for this you will need the reading about the FCC that was passed out in class. It's called Regulation of Broadcast Media. Looks like that, although the font of the title looks slightly different here than what you received in class. If you don't have that in front of you, please pause the video, make sure you get the reading, and restart the video when you're ready. All right, I'm assuming you have the reading in front of you now. What I want you to do, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and I will time it. I'm going to give you 2 minutes. I want you to look over the reading one more time. You know, you were to have read this already, but I want you to take 2 minutes to review it, starting now. And that's 2 minutes. All right, I'd like you to turn that reading over so the regulation of U.S. broadcast media reading is down. The type A behavior reading will be on top now. I just don't want you to be able to see this reading anymore. And I want a piece of paper and write out your answers to the following questions. You don't have to copy the questions, but write your answers to the following. First of all, before the FCC was created, what cabinet department was responsible for the regulation of radio broadcasting? The second, what was the FCC called before it was the FCC? Third, in 1983, what were there more of? Educational radio stations or commercial TV stations? I'll give you 1 minute to write your answers to those questions. All right, that's a minute. Now, when I do this exercise in class, I always ask people how many questions they think they got right. So I usually say, put a hand up if you're confident that you got all 3 correct. And then we see how many people raise their hands. I say, okay, put a hand up if you think you probably got 2, at least 2 correct. And we see how many people put their hands up. And I say, well, put a hand up now if you think you might have gotten 1 correct, 1 or more. And what usually happens is, of course, there won't be many people, maybe one person or maybe no one at all, who is confident about having gotten all three. There will be a few who think they got two, and then, most people probably got one. I mean, it varies from class to class. Maybe most people, maybe half, maybe not that many. And that's the way it is. And if you're like a lot of my students when I've done this in class, probably that minute I gave you to write the answers, you weren't probably using that minute. You probably, if you got an answer, you probably got it right away, and the rest of the time you're kind of scratching your head, not sure exactly what to put down. What I'm going to do now to these questions, and I am going to have you, when I say go, I'm going to have you turn over the reading, and I'm going to have you put the regulation of U.S. broadcast media back on top. I'm going to give you time to look at it again. This time I will give you only 30 seconds. Are you ready? Your 30 seconds starts now. Go. And that's 30, so you can't see it. And again, I want you to answer these three questions, and instead of giving you, I would like you just to pause the video, write your answers to the questions, and when you are done, restart the video. All right. Now, I'm assuming you have gone through and attempted the three questions and written answers if you have them. And again, when I do this in class, I ask people, okay, how many people are confident that they got all three right? How many people think they probably got at least two right? And how many people think they may have gotten one or more? And of course, the results are different because, most people at this point, the second time around, will have gotten two or three. There will be quite a few hands that go up, about half the class who got all three, and just about everyone got at least two. And so I ask, what is the difference? And I'll ask you, what is the difference between the first time you tried to answer the questions and the second time you tried to answer the questions? And of course the answer is, the second time you knew what the answers were going to be going in. You knew what the answers were going to be, so when you looked at that reading, and mind you, you were looking at it for only 30 seconds. Before, you had had who knows how long to look at it the first time, to read it the first time. You had had 2 minutes to review it, and still you didn't do that well on the questions, I'm assuming. The second time, you had only 30 seconds, and yet you managed to get, I imagine, 2 or probably 3 of these questions exactly right. And the difference was, of course, you knew what the questions were going to be ahead of time. Now, what can we learn from this? Oh, by the way, I forgot I was going to give you the answers to the questions. Before the FCC was created, what cabinet department was responsible? It was the Department of Commerce and Labor. What was the FCC called before it was the FCC? It was called the FRC, or Federal Radio Commission. And in 1983, there were more educational radio stations than there were commercial stations. If you look at the read, you'll see all those answers. Department of Commerce and Labor. Up in the first paragraph, the Federal Radio Commission, and it's becoming the FCC in the second paragraph, and then in the paragraph, the very end paragraph, the numbers of educational radio stations, the numbers of commercial TV stations, and there were more than 1,000 educational radio stations and fewer than 900 commercial TV stations. So those were the actual answers. Now again, I say, what was the difference between your two readings, or your two answering of the questions? And of course the difference was the second time around you knew what the questions were going to be. And now we ask, what lesson can we draw from this? And the lesson we can draw is, well, it would be helpful if I would give you the exam questions ahead of time. Since that's not going to happen, what other lesson can we draw? And the other lesson we could draw is, when you are reading something with the intent of answering specific questions, you are more focused. You read more quickly. You are more engaged. I imagine when you read the passage the first time, and when you reviewed it in those 2 minutes, you didn't, you read it. It was kind of cool, kind of interesting stuff. Maybe you were interested, maybe you weren't. Stuff you didn't know before, but you probably weren't that focused. You weren't that engaged. It was just out there. The second time around, the 32nd time, I should say. When you're reading it, not the 32nd time, you didn't read it 32 times, but the time you read it and it was only 30 seconds. That time you knew what you were looking for, you focused, you looked, you were engaged in the reading. Now, if you're going to read a passage, if you've been assigned to read something, if the instructor has given you a few questions to answer that you know you're going to have to answer, that's great. Usually that won't happen. So the trick I'm going to give you today is that you should, or I suggest that you look at the title of the chapter or the section or the subsection or whatever. Look at the title and make your own questions out of it. So I look at this and I say, regulation of U.S. broadcast media. What are some questions I could make out of that? You know, what are some questions that relate to the title? I'm making the title into a question. What are some questions that relate to the title and might be answered in the section? Well, one question that comes to mind is, obviously, how are U.S. broadcast media regulated? How's it done? Another question, let's see, I see that U.S. there, and I say, well, okay, how are U.S. broadcast media regulated differently from broadcast media in other countries? That's a decent question. It relates to the title. Another question, I see this word broadcast here. I say, well, okay, how are U.S. broadcast media regulated differently from U.S. print media? Okay, so I've got these three questions, and when I read, I'm engaged, I'm focused, I'm trying to find the answers to those. Now, notice those last two questions I asked, the contrast ones, the difference ones. You know, how are U.S. broadcast media regulated differently from broadcast media in other countries? How are broadcast media in the U.S. regulated differently from print media in the U.S.? Nothing in the passage addresses those questions. Those questions are not answered here. That's okay. This is a psychological trick. I look at the title, I think about what I'm going to be reading, I think about what questions might be answered, and when I'm reading, when I'm going through here, I am focused. I'm thinking, okay, what are the answers to my questions? What are the answers to my questions? It sure as heck beats opening the book and just glancing over it and not really taking in anything. So that's the trick for today, focusing on your reading. How can you do it? Whatever the title is of the chapter, the section, the subsection, whatever, make that title into a couple of questions, 2 or 3 questions. Read the passage with an eye toward answering those questions, and then you will be engaged on the reading much more than you would have been otherwise. And this concludes mini video 2.